right now, I want to just walk you through one more thought on decision making and something that we've been talking about. So let me tell you a story. I was reading an article. His name was Josh, didn't get a last name, but a pretty high profile business executive, young, but really upcoming and making a whole boatload of money in the Chicago area. And literally was becoming a shaker and a mover in just the business world in downtown Chicago. And Josh told a story, a life-changing story of him driving back from work and going through the neighborhoods, and he was driving his brand new Jaguar F-Type, and he said it was going a little bit faster than I should have been going through some of these Chicago neighborhoods. And as I was going by, he says, and speeding through some of these neighborhoods, he said, I thought I ran over something, and then I realized somebody threw something at my car. And not just threw something, somebody threw a brick at my car. And so he literally, Josh goes, I slammed on the brakes, put the car in reverse, and he says, when I backed the car up, I saw the kid who threw the brick at my car there, but he wasn't running away. It wasn't like he threw it and ran. He said, so when I jumped out of my car and ran up to this kid, like, what are you doing? Screaming at the kid. He wrote these words in his article. The young man said, please, mister, please, I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do. He said, I threw the brick because no one else would stop. It's my brother. He rolled off the curb and fell out of his wheelchair, and I can't lift him up. He said, sobbing, the boy said, would you please help me get him back in his wheelchair? He's hurt, and he's too heavy for me. Josh said he felt awful, walked over, got that little boy back in his wheelchair, dusted him off, and he said he sat there as he watched that little boy wheel his brother all the way home at that point. And this is what Josh said. Josh said, when I left that day, he said, I never got the dent fixed in my car. He says, what that dent does is it reminds me not to drive too fast in life and to miss what's really going on in people's lives. And he says, I've got to keep that in mind. And how many know sometimes we need to get a little bit of a dent once in a while to kind of get a perspective of things. And especially when you think of these, when I think of somebody like Josh, who's got a boatload of money, driving his brand new F-Type Jaguar, and all of a sudden driving so fast, forgets on really what the important things of life are. You know, when I think of the top 3 richest men really on the planet, when you think of people like Jeff Bezos, when you think of Bill Gates, when you think of Warren Buffett, I think of these guys, and what's interesting when I think about them, I never hear very many dent stories from them. I'll hear about how to invest. I'll hear about how I made my money. I'll hear about mutual funds or this, but I don't hear much about the dent stories that changed them and that made them who they are. Because what begins to happen is it's so easy sometimes to make decisions from checks instead of dents. And beginning to realize that sometimes we need that dent to understand how important those things are in our life. And where Josh makes the decision now, Josh said, the Chicago businessman, I make the decisions with the dent in mind. The last thing I want to do is make decisions with simply a check in mind and finances and how much finances I can get. That's why I love the story that Chuck Swindoll tells of an older man who made a bunch of money, but he tells it from not the dent, but he tells it from the check standpoint of his life. Swindoll said that this man was so determined that the money that he made, he was determined to take it with him. And he told his wife this, he says, when it's time for me to go, I'm gathering all of my money and I'm hanging it in a sack from the rafters of the attic. Because he said, when I start going to heaven, I'm gonna grab the sack on the way there and I'm taking that sack with me. And sure enough, a few months later, the man passed away and the sack was hanging in the attic. And so once he passed away, the wife ran up the stairs to see if the sack was there. And sure enough, the sack was there. It didn't go to heaven. And she said, I knew I should have put it in the basement on his way to hell. So I just knew at that point that was going to be the point. That's kind of having the wrong perspective on this whole thing. But let me just tell you something. No matter how much money you make, there's a lot of things that money can't buy. Keep this in mind. Money can buy you a house, but it can't buy you a home. Money can buy you a bed, but it can't buy you a good night's sleep. Money can buy you a clock, but it can't buy you time. Money can buy you medicine, but it can't buy you health. Money can buy you a position, but it can't buy you respect. And money can buy you blood, but not life. And money can buy you sex, but it can't buy you love. And that's why when you begin to get a dent once in a while, you realize how important the second half of those things really are. See, when you think about this whole thing, about what money can do, you realize what real wealth is. The measure of wealth, get this down, the measure of wealth is not by the things you have, but by the things you have for which you would never take money for them. That's what really shows you how important that is. Because that's when you begin to judge life by the dents and not simply by the check, what makes this so important. And that's why I need people to tell me about the second half of the list, about the homes, on how to make a home, on how to love my wife. I don't need to know how to buy a Swiss watch that can tell time. I need to know how to value time and use it correctly. And that's why these are so important, that what the dents do, the dents tell you about the second half of what money can't buy. But when you begin to talk about the check will tell you how to buy a Swiss watch, it'll tell you about how to buy a house, it'll tell you how to buy sex, it'll tell you how to buy all these other things. But what the dents do, it tells you what really matters in life. It tells you the important things. And as I began to think about this, I came across something that I was reading in a diary that I thought, I think this is really important for us to see. Because when I began to think about the dents and not the checks, I began to realize that today, what I want to talk to you about is something I want to really preach to you from, or talk to you from the diary of a really, really rich man today. Because I want you to see about a guy that lived by the check but ended up talking about the dents. He lived by the money, he lived by what he had, but he ended up going, man, I'm starting to see what life is all about. I want to ask you this question. Listen for just a moment. What if someone can tell you if it's worth it? What do you mean, Pastor Tim? If someone had the complete truth about all the experiences that you are pursuing, spending your time and energy pursuing, and if they could tell you if it's worth it or not, would you listen? I mean, just think about this for a moment. Everything you're pursuing, whether it's positions, certain to become, I want to be my own man, my own boss. I want to own my own home. I want to build this. I want to build a company. I want to build a family. Can tell you about if it's worth it for marriage, if it's worth it to have children. Think about this for a second. What if somebody could tell you if your pursuit is worth it, and it's absolutely true? Would you listen to it? Someone who's experienced it all. Probably there's not one thing that you're pursuing after that this man hadn't pursued after and attained it. Because the thing that scares me sometimes, think about this, I think sometimes people ask questions but never really want the answers to the questions. They will ask stuff but don't give it enough time for it to sink in. Let me give you one example. This is probably one of the most profound questions that has ever been asked in the New Testament, and it's asked to Jesus. But I think the question was asked, but I don't think the answer was really thought about or even wanted. It was asked by Pilate. Let me read it to you. It's John 18, verse 38. Just before he goes to trial, Pilate said to Jesus, "What is truth?" Think about that question. But look at the next part. And when he said this, it doesn't say he stopped and listened. It said he went out again to the Jews. He didn't even stay long enough to hear Jesus answer the question. And we don't even get the answer to that amazing question of what's truth because he wouldn't stay long enough to hear Jesus answer the question. So when you're going to ask something, and when you're asked something like this, would you listen if somebody tells you if it's worth it? If something like this of understanding all of our pursuits and getting to the end of it, is it worth the time, energy, and resources for us to give for something, to give pursuit? Is it really worth it? Because I think the issue is a lot of us, think about this, we all have sight, but a lot of us don't have insight. Because when you think of sight, that's the check. When you think of insight, that's the dent. The check will let you see something. I want that home. I want that Rolex. I want that watch. I want that campground. I want this. You can think check, but what the dent does, it goes, this is what's really valuable. This is the stuff. And that's why I think this is important about decision making today, for us to understand how important this is. So I want to tell you about this diary that I read this week. And I want to tell you the story of this really rich guy and his diary. So let me just tell you a story. When you put together Bezos, Gates, Buffett, let's even add Zuckerberg to it, all the money that these guys had, it doesn't even come close to how rich this guy was. In fact, he was the richest guy that ever walked the planet. I want you to think about this for just a moment here. This is a man that had the time, the energy, the money, the resources to do all the things and pursue all the things that every one of us are taking a lot of time to do. And here's what's crazy. He had these kind of resources and he was free to do whatever he wanted to do. Think about this. He had no accountability. No one could question him. No one could even audit him about his finances. There wasn't an IRS. There wasn't Congress. There wasn't a board. He could do whatever he wanted. He began to inherit a position from his father, and he was the highest office in the land, that he was able for 40 years to spend all the finances on himself, because his dad for 40 years was defending a country. In fact, his father used all of the national, the money that was part of his country, he used it to defend his country. And for 40 years, he fought where his son had 40 years of peace. And with 40 years of peace and those finances, he was able then to splurge and do it all for himself. The money was available to do all of his pursuits. And when it was said and done, think about this, he wrote about it. That's what got my attention. He wrote about 40 years of doing things with no accountability, limitless resources, and he could do whatever he wanted to do, and he wrote about the end of it. And here's the crazy part. Here's a caveat. And what if what he wrote, there was no lie, it was absolutely true? There was no lie to what he said. Let me tell you about the diary. In fact, his diary is called Ecclesiastes, and the man who journaled it, his name is Solomon. It's amazing to me that in the 66 books of the Bible, that God would choose to put a diary of a really rich man in there who said, let me tell you what the end of all of it is. That he would walk through and tell us, let me tell you the end so you could be good decision makers. Let me tell you what this is all about so you can understand how important this is. So what I want to do for you today, I want to read to you diary entry number 2. We would call it Ecclesiastes 2, but I want to read to you diary entry number 2 that Solomon wrote on what his pursuits were, because I think there's something here that you're going to see when I'm talking about of a guy that had limitless resources, unlimited resources. He had no accountability and was able to do what he wants, and I want you to see what he said. So let me read through it. This is entry number 2 in his diary. Let me read it to you. It starts in verse 1 of Ecclesiastes. So I said to myself, let's go for it. Experiment with pleasure, have a good time, but there was nothing to it, nothing but smoke. What do I think of the fun-filled life? It's insane, it's inane. My verdict on the pursuit of happiness is who needs it. In fact, let me just pause here for a moment. One of the versions, when you look at this, says, I started laughing, adding laughter all the time to my agenda, is what one of the versions say. What he was saying was, I've gone to every comedy club, I saw every comedy movie, I've tried to medicate myself with laughing, and this is what he said, it's insanity, it doesn't even work. Then he goes on, he says this in verse 3. He says, with the help of a bottle of wine and all the wisdom I can muster, I tried my level best to penetrate the absurdity of life. I wanted to get a handle on anything useful we mortals might do during the years that we spend on this earth. Let me just read to you. One of the other versions said this. It says, I try to stimulate my body with the best wine while my mind was guiding me wisely. That's interesting. You know what he was saying? He was saying, I wasn't a drunk. I was drinking the best wine. Trying to begin to find something in a glass of wine or in alcohol. And he says, that didn't even bring joy to me. It wasn't I was on the street corner sitting in a gutter drinking wine. Think about this. He says, I was trying to find something in drinking wine, thinking it's going to make me something. And this is what he said. He said, I started to realize even at that doesn't even help me. Now, don't look at me like I'm saying this. This is Solomon. So if you're ticked off today, look at Solomon today. Because I know some of you are going like, I told you to let's go to the Broussard campus. Okay, keep going now. Verse 4, he says this. I did great things. I built houses, planted vineyards. I designed gardens and parks and planted a variety of fruit trees in them. I made pools of water to irrigate the groves of trees. You know what he was saying was, I became a philanthropist. This is what I said. I'll do parks for the community. I'm going to put my plaque on everything. This is going to be Solomon's Playground, Solomon's Park, Solomon's Hospital, Solomon's Children's Center, Solomon's Surgical Center. He says, if you looked all over Jerusalem, I had my name on everything. I became a philanthropist because I thought, man, if I can't find it in myself, I'll just start doing it for everybody else. He says, that didn't even work for me. In fact, he goes on and says, so I decided at that point, since that wasn't going to work for me, I decided, ready for this? He said, I started to buy slaves and male and female who had children, giving me more slaves. I acquired large herds of flocks, larger than anything before me. He said this, he said, I'm going to get so much stuff. He says, I'm going to have people do for me what I don't even have to do for myself. I don't even have to cut my lawn anymore. I'll let them cut the lawn. I'll let them do the windows. I'll let them take care of the grounds. I'll let them do everything because I don't want to do anything meaningful. I got people I can order around to do this, but man, I wasn't finding it through there. And then he says this. He said, maybe I'll just start collecting stuff. In fact, in verse 8, he says, I piled up silver and gold and loot from kings and kingdoms. One version says I became a collector. So he went on eBay and just started buying stuff all over the world at this point, and said, I gathered a chorus of singers to entertain me with song, and most exquisite of all my pleasures. And in fact, he says, even voluptuous maidens for my bed. Let me just pause there for a second, because if you don't know this, Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Think about that for a second. So if you're sitting here today going like, man, I'm single and I need a wife. Solomon had 700, and that didn't even satisfy him. Now, I'm just saying this. Like, listen, I have one, and I'm happy. Okay, that's it. I don't want to, I said this, I have one, and then some guy in the last service yelled, and that's enough. And so I thought, he's in a lot of trouble when he leaves today. Think for a second, though. You have single people wanting to get married, you have married people wanting to be single, and Solomon said, I did it 700 times, and it still doesn't work. And in fact, then I decided I'll just start sleeping with women and added 300 to the 700. Like, nobody could question it. Wife 329 couldn't say, why are you marrying 330? And wife 562 wasn't going like, what do you see in 563? Nobody could say anything. 700 wives, and he could do whatever he wanted to do. And then he says this, listen to this, verse 9. I prospered, I left all my predecessors in Jerusalem far behind. I left them behind in the dust. And this is the phrase that got me. He goes, what's more, I kept a clear head through it. Look at, let's keep that phrase up there for a second. Look at me for a second. You know what Solomon said? He says, I wasn't so high and so drunk and so into it that I couldn't tell you what the real story is. He said, I kept my head through it all. That's why I'm writing this. He says, I know what the end of all this is. I realize what's on the other end of this and why I'm telling you what these dents have done to me. In fact, listen to what he says in verse 10 and 11, which are like a sledgehammer. He says this, everything I wanted, I took. I never said to myself, no. I gave in to every impulse, held back nothing. I sucked the marrow of pleasure out of every task, and my reward to me for a hard day's work. Look at that. Everything I wanted, I took and never said no to myself. Verse 11, then I took a good look at everything I've done and looked at all the sweat and hard work. But when I looked, I saw nothing but smoke and spitting into the wind. There was nothing to any of it, nothing. That's the diary of a very, very rich man. Think of that for just a moment. This is what he wrote. This is a man who had every resource to do whatever he wanted. And folks, let me just tell you something. This is the other end of getting what you want. This is the other end of never being denied, getting exactly what you want, every impulse, everything you want to do. And Solomon says, I've done it. And to understand this diary just a little bit better, and maybe to help us with making decisions from a dent and not simply from a check, I think there's two words in Solomon's diary. I want you to jot down these two words because these are really important to understanding the diary and can help us in making some decisions in our life. The two words or the key words in Solomon's diary are these two key words. He says, under the sun, a whole bunch, and then he says vanity, the most of any other word. Under the sun and vanity in 12 chapters or 12 journal entries into Ecclesiastes, this is what he talks about. Because these are his dent moments. These are his moments that he's about to help us in unpacking this. In fact, let me start here. Under the sun is important. It means heaven is not even a consideration or a focus. What Solomon was saying is, I just see what I have here and now. It's a horizontal view. When he speaks about under the sun, he's saying, it's just what I see with these eyes right here. I'm never asking God, never considering God. I'm doing what I want to do. If I want to follow after this business pursuit, if I want to go after this, if I want to go over here, he says, I just do whatever I want. It's under the sun. There's no consideration that God may have an opinion about what I'm about to do or decide. That's a big deal. He said, I made all my decisions under the sun. So let me just add this just so we understand this. Satisfaction under the sun will never occur until there is a look above the sun to the Son of God himself. That's just the way it is. And Solomon was trying to tell us that. And then the second word, which I think is the most important, that is going to help us on making these decisions, because this diary sets it straight. There was nothing he saw, discovered, attempted, produced, initiated, concluded that had any lasting joy for him. And I think he made some really important decisions based on this one word, vanity. Vanity is the most used and the most important word of this rich man's diary. Now, when we think of vanity, we're kind of thinking of a little girl and Barbie and putting makeup on, and that's nothing could be further from the truth when you think about this word. Here's the guy, here's the rich man, richest man ever, and he's about to tell us something really important. This word is used 38 times in these 200 or so verses, which means about every 4 verses, he'll talk about vanity. And if he's saying it 38 times in these 12 journal entries, I think we better take a look at what it means, because I think it's really important. Because decision making with this word vanity in our sights is really what I want us to do. I want you to be able to make a decision keeping what this rich man said. And I think this one important word will kind of shed light on it. So keep that as a pause there for a moment. Let me tell you a personal story real quick. When I was doing my graduate work and studying biblical languages, I abandoned Hebrew. I said it was because I didn't like the professor, but it was just too hard. I blamed the professor. I just said, the professor's horrible, but really I didn't want to go through all the work. So my studies in ancient languages was in Greek. That's what I studied. And those two languages are so different. So for those that don't know, when they wrote the Old Testament, it was written in Hebrew. When they wrote the New Testament, it was written in Greek. Those are the original languages. So when we would study Greek, we would read through just the manuscripts of just how it was written and just see the wording, and it was really just fascinating. And the difference between Greek and Hebrew goes like this. Greek is a very wordy language. It uses a lot of synonyms to describe one word. We would just say, I love you, but in the Greek, it'd be 4 different words. They want to know which one of the words are you using to say you love somebody, because there would be words, would it be phileo, a brotherly love, storge, a family love? Would it be eros, a sensual love? Or would it be agape, a Christian, a godly love? There was 9 different words for sin. We would just say, don't sin. They would go, it could be a transgression, it could be a trespass. It's just a whole bunch of different words that they would use. Even for prayer, there's like 9 different words. There could be everything from supplication to intercession that would be used there for the word prayer. But Hebrew, now here's the part I want you to get. So just stay with me. Hebrew was different. It was a picturesque language. It was much larger. That when you hear a word, it would have a story behind the word. And I just didn't want to do the work. I just didn't want to do the work of understanding the story. When I abandoned Hebrew, somebody told me, it says, don't give up. They sent me to a rabbinical, a Jewish store, a bookstore in downtown Brooklyn, New York. And I kind of got a little bit of a revival in me of how important these words are when I would study the Bible. In fact, one of the books that I picked up was called Do Not Get It. It's not worth getting, but it is good. It was just good like for a moment. But it's called The Secret of Hebrew Words. And it's got, there's a few moments to it. Let me tell you one of those, and I'll tell you about vanity in just a second. So I'm going to throw this on the screen. It's not going to mean much, but let me explain it to you. So when a Jew thinks of the Old Testament and it's certain significant words, they pop to them. They're going like, that's the story behind the word. Let me give you one. So the word truth in the Hebrew is made up of these 3 letters. Now, the Hebrew letters would be the aleph, then it would be mem and tav. Now, let me tell you the difference. Now, in Hebrew, you read, like we would read from English, left to right. In Hebrew, you read from right to left. That's the way you read. We had a missionary, I have to tell you this story. We had a missionary come from Japan, and if you're reading Japanese, they have to read up and down. So they told us at church one time, they said, the missionary from Japan said, you guys read the Bible all wrong. You read the Bible like this. We read the Bible like this is what that's free. But okay, let's go back to Hebrew for just a second. So if you're reading the Hebrew language, you're reading it backwards. So you read it from right to left. So here's what's interesting. The first letter is aleph. Second letter is mem. The last letter is tav. Some of you going like, and so the next slide should say, who cares? But it really is important for a second. Let me tell you why. To the Jew, when they see those letters up there, they understand what truth is. Here's the picture to them. If you look at those letters, so Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Mem is the middle letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and Tav is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. You know what they believe? That if something is true, it's true in the beginning, it's truth in the middle, and it's truth at the very end. They said when something is true, since truth has no expiration date, that means if it's true, it doesn't expire at all. Which means if Jesus was the truth 2,000 years ago and God in the flesh, let me just tell you something, he's still God today. That's who he is. He is true throughout. That's how they see it. That's how they govern what truth was. Is it truth at the beginning and will it be truth at the end? That's when you know something is true. So vanity, keep this in mind now, vanity kind of carries with it a little bit of this story. So let me tell you this and then we're going to close, but it's a long closing, so don't get your keys. Here we go. So vanity, the picture is not just, some versions may say empty or smoke or nothing or puff of wind. The word actually means, get ready for this, jot this down. The word actually means an empty bucket, is what it means. There's nothing in it. And here's the picture that every Jew thinks about when they see the word vanity. They're not thinking of it, let's put on makeup. This is what they think about. It's this story that the Jew will tell. It says, when you go, and think about this for decision making. When you go to a well, you bring your bucket there, you hang it, you're going down into the well to get water to drink. And when you bring it up and get ready to look in the bucket, listen to this now, there's nothing in the bucket. He says you go through all of this energy, time, and resource, and when the bucket comes up, there's nothing in the bucket. What he was doing was he was telling you to ask the question, is there enough in the bucket after all your time, effort, and energy to make it worth even doing? He says, if you want to make a decision, see if there's enough in the bucket. Let me give you an example. So this week we had a few days off during Mardi Gras week, and being from the north, we don't understand Mardi Gras. People just go, you got to get out of town. So I go, okay, hurry up, get in the car, get out of town. And so we were flying down I-10 and just running away from we don't know what. So we're running away, the beads. So we're getting away from the beads. So we're getting out and we get out of town. And here's what's crazy. So we spent our time, energy, and resources to go away with our family because we knew our son was going to be gone, going to college, and that we're not going to have maybe those solid times together as a tribe to hang out. So we went ahead, got a hotel, and so this is what we did for those days. We did everything from, we did bowling, we did laser tag, which I came in last every time. So that's why you never bring me hunting. I'm just like, so we did sand castles. We were at a restaurant. They were throwing rolls at us. We did all this, playing cards at night together, all this stuff. When everything was said and done, 3 to 4 days are over, money was spent on all that stuff. Look at me. And we put everything down into the well and came up. Was there enough in the bucket to make it worth it? Absolutely. We created memories. We spent time with our families. We were together and enjoying one another. That was a good bucket. And you have to ask that every single time you get ready to make a decision. You have to ask yourself when you're getting ready to go, okay, I'm going to give these hours. I'm watching to see if LSU is going to win, even though their coach is fired and on the FBI and all this stuff. And we're going to see if they're going to finally win the SEC with knowing that this is the first time in 10 years. And all of a sudden you spend 3 and 4 hours watching it. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying you got to make sure there's enough in the bucket. You got to make sure that when you get ready to make a decision, whether it's as simple as what you're going to watch, what you're going to play, who you're going to hang with, who you're going to marry, you better make sure there's enough in the bucket to make sure it's worth your time, energy, and resources. And what Solomon was saying was, listen, when I brought it all up after 700 wives, there's not enough in the bucket. I should have stayed with one. When you think about this, this is what Solomon was challenging us. So here's the question. Let's make it as simple as this. Pastor Jovan talked about going to Growth Track today. Step 2, which is amazing. We're always trying to take you on a 4-step journey. We want people to know God, to find freedom, to discover purpose, and to make a difference. So when we invite you to come today for step 2, which is probably the best of all the classes, which means some of you going like, well, I wasn't there for step 1. You can come to step 2. You can join at any step. And so when you come today, here's what's incredible. You get a chance to go, okay, I'm gonna be here. I leave my kids in OSC Kids. They're gonna be ministered to and eat lunch. We'll eat lunch in here. And then for 30 minutes, we're gonna take a personality test and a gifts test. So we're gonna lower down the bucket. So here's the question. You spend an hour here today eating, which you gotta eat anyway. You're gonna have some things told to you about how God has wired you. Here's my question. When the hour's up, is that a good bucket? And I'm here to tell you, that's a good bucket. It really is a good bucket. And some of you going like, well, maybe it'd be better if we just hurry up out of here and get out of here so we can go to Piccadilly. And I'm just telling you, this is better than Piccadilly. It's a better bucket. How about when somebody asks you after a hard week of work to join a small group, to give one night a week to find freedom so you would have relationships that probably you'll form that will walk with you the rest of your life? Here's my question. Giving up one night a week to begin to form some amazing relationships, is that a good bucket? That's a great bucket. But what you're doing is you're looking at things going, is the payoff, we would call that in the business world an ROI. Is that payoff a return on investment? Is that return on investment worth my time, effort, and energy? And that's the way we make decisions. We don't just simply make decisions going, that's what I want to do. That's what Solomon did. Solomon said, I gave into every impulse, did what I wanted to do, and when it's all said and done, he said there was nothing in the bucket. Nothing was there. And that's why Solomon was challenging us. And you know what my new prayer is this? God, give us good buckets. God, give us good buckets. Let what we decide something as a family, we decide something as an individual. Is it that if I'm gonna take my money out of my 401k so I can do my dream, when you bring that bucket up, there better be enough in that bucket. And that's the way what Solomon was telling us to make some decisions here and how important it was for us to understand how we begin to do this. This is where Solomon then comes to the very end and finally realizes this. If God is not part of this bucket system, he says this thing is a failure. It really is. In fact, how he ends journal entry number 2 is pretty amazing. And this is where we close. He ends journal entry number 2 with Ecclesiastes 2:25, and he says, who can have enjoyment without him? He said, if he's not part of the bucket, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't seem to work when we put all of this together. See, when you think about if God is not part of the equation, then what you're doing is you're trying to get something out of a bucket that's just not gonna be there. You're gonna try to find something in somebody that's not there. If God's not part of your equation, it just doesn't work. I was reading the story of an old couple, been married 40 years. Two worked on a farm, and they were driving his old pickup. And as the wife and husband were sitting there, the husband was driving, the wife just looked at him and just said, we never sit close together anymore. We used to be snuggled up every time we drove in this old pickup. And the husband looked at her and said, I haven't moved. I mean, just think for a second here. He said, I can't go anywhere. If we do, we're in a car wreck. So the one that keeps moving closer to the window wasn't the husband. And that's kind of where Solomon was. Solomon's going like, where's God? And God goes, I haven't moved. I've been here the whole time. When you move away and try to use buckets to do it without me, it just doesn't work anymore. That God has to be part of that equation when we're making those kind of decisions. So let me close today by telling you about a third rich guy. I want you to think. So we have Josh, the Jaguar driver. We have Solomon, the diary writer. I want to just close. I want to tell you about one more rich guy. Just take a second. His name is Job, and he has got a lot of pain in his life. In fact, the Bible says he was rich. Listen to Job 1-3. It just simply says, Job was a man, lived in Uz, honest inside and out, man of his word, totally devoted to God, hated evil with a passion, had 7 sons, 3 daughters, and it says this, he was also very wealthy. And as I was reading this week, Job, this third rich guy, uses a word that kind of stood out to me. He uses this word prime as I was reading. Prime, P-R-I-M-E. Let me just ask you a question. What do you think about when you hear that word prime? Some of you are thinking, okay, some business people are going prime rate, prime interest rates. That's the best interest rate we can get. So we're thinking of prime rates. There's some people who really heady and thinking of math and thinking prime numbers. And prime numbers only divisible by 1, and you can't. Okay, we don't care. So some of you are also thinking. Most of you are thinking about food. You're thinking about how many thought about prime rib and prime. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that. And if you didn't raise your hand, I'm very disappointed because there's prime cuts of meat. There's choice. There's prime, the best cut of meat you can get. Usually only found in restaurants or special ordered. These are the prime cuts of meat. So when you come to Growth Track today, I'm not promising prime meat for your food today, but prime teaching. So let me just let you know there's also, when you think of the athletic world, you think there's people that are going like we call an athlete being in his prime. It's the apex. That's when all of a sudden the mental, emotional, physical all begin to kind of to converge, and that they're at the prime of their career. We even talk about the prime of life. Some people are going like 50s are the new 60s and 40s are, the new 30s. And you have people going like, this is when you're at your best. And so this is why you have to take positions, because when you're getting older and you have to do this. And then there's some of us who just buy books who think of Amazon Prime. That's like me. When I'm thinking of Prime, I'm going like, that means I get it in 2 days. That's what that means to me. How many thought that? How many thought that? Okay, I just want to make sure. So we are so simple here. We just either think of food or books. That's all we're thinking of. Amazon or I want to eat. I want to eat with my book from Amazon Prime. So it's pretty cool because Job redefines prime. He takes the apex, the best you can be. Because if you're a prime member of Amazon, it means you get the best. And when you have an interest rate, you get the best interest rate. If you're prime, you get the best. Job redefines prime. And when I read this week, I'm going, wow. Let me read to you how he redefines it, and we close. He said, I was in the prime of my days when the friendship of God was over my tent. Okay, just think for a second. He says, this is when I was at my best. This is when something amazing was happening in my life. I was in the prime of my days. Can I give you just a couple of different ways to say it, a couple of the versions? Living Bible says this, when I was in the prime of my days, he says the friendship of God was felt in my home. Think about that. That's prime. Prime to me was the friendship of God. And my favorite one from the contemporary version, when I was in the prime of my days, God all-powerful, look at this, was my closest friend. God was my closest friend. He says that's prime to me. Prime is when God became my closest friend, and I realized how important that is, because this is where you realize that when you want to hit prime, this is Job speaking from dents. Talk about dents. He wasn't speaking from a check. He was speaking from a dent. And he goes, you want to know something? The greatest days of my life is not when I see the check. The greatest days of life is when God is closest to my life. That's prime to me. You want to know what he says, when the friendship of God is with me. You want to know what real friendship is? I love this. Someone said a friend is someone who understands your past, believes in your future, and accepts you just the way you are. And the best person for that is God himself. That's nobody else. Understands my past, believes in my future, and accepts me. In fact, another person said it like this: a friend is one who walks in when everybody else walks out. And I could just tell you this, there's nobody who did that more for Job than God himself. When all of his friends are going like, you messed up, you're done, I can't believe this, that's when God walked into his life, because he knew prime to him was when I'm in my closest relationship to God. That's when it starts. Think how incredible this is. BYU, Brigham Young University, just did a story. In fact, it was a meta-analysis. They took 149 different studies around the world and compiled all the information. And this is what they said. They said, when you have a close friend and a close circle of friends around your life, it doubles your chance of survival of any tragedy that you're going through. You double your chance. They said, if you go through it by yourself, you cut it in half if you're going to survive. They said, so if you're battling everything from divorce to cancer and you have a circle of close friends, it says you've just doubled your survival rate at that point. Think about how amazing that is, what friendship does. What do you think happens when that close friend is God himself? Because when God is your closest friend, you ready for this? You get to live really, really long when your friend is God. Talk about doubling your chance. You just secured your future forever when God is your friend. Pastor Tim, how does that happen? Okay, let's finish. In order to have a friendship with God, there needs to be an introduction. In order to have a friendship with God, some of you go like, well, I go to church. God's my friend. I was baptized. God is my friend. I've gone to mass, so God is my friend. I've been confirmed, or I've taken communion. God is my friend. That's not the introduction that Jesus talks about. Jesus says there is an introduction. There is a handshake that starts your journey. And the journey that Jesus talks about is simply this. He says, in order to become my friends, the introduction takes place by being born again. This is where it starts. This is where you start the journey of prime day. He says, you want to be at the prime of your life for a really long time? He says, now watch this. He says, this is really worth the bucket. This is really worth it. In fact, let me say this. Look at me close. Everybody just look at me up here for a second. Because I want to give you a word of advice here for a second. What I'm about to share with you is such a strong bucket and so good that what I don't want you to do is this. It's so easy for us to go, oh, I'm a friend of God. I'm going to get ready to go because those Christians, they drive like demons when they're getting out of the parking lot. And we got to get out of here. We got to just make sure. Okay, I want to help you with something here for a moment. We're wanting to get people to prime, to friendship with God, and we've got to introduce them. Can I just tell you, you getting out of the parking lot first, look at me, there's not enough in the bucket for that. There's not enough in the bucket. So what do you do? Do we have a trophy outside for you? Going, you're first out, here's a trophy. It's a picture of you driving your car going, hey. Okay, there's nothing. You don't get any trophy. So tell me, what's in the bucket for you? But if you could just stay, listen, if you could just stay put and go, there's a lot in this bucket. If you could just stay and start praying for the people on your row, there's a lot in that bucket. If you just pray for them right now, just pray for them. Because in just a moment, we're going to bow their heads and we're going to introduce them to the prime of days, the prime of life. Pastor Tim, how do I start that introduction with God? It's as simple as ABC. That's what we say all the time. It's ABC. A, I admit I'm a sinner. I admit that I can't make God like me because there's sin in my life. But God says, I'm going to get that out of you. But you got to admit that you can do all the work that you want to do to try to fix the sin issue inside of us, but it just can't get fixed by you. It has to be fixed by somebody else. Every one of us has a sin issue that needs to be dealt with. How do I deal with it? That's the B part. Believing that Jesus came to not only die for my sin and forgive my sin, but really to fight against the sin that's inside of me. And to give us prime days. How does that happen? By confessing him as Lord. This is what's saying, God, you know what? You're so much smarter than I am. Might as well just listen to you and what you have for my life. It's as simple as ABC. And I want you to start. I want your best days to be ahead of you. Not only here, but forever. Would you bow your head as we pray together and close? If you have the right people in your life, you double your chances of survival. If you have God in your life, you're going to live a really long time, which is called eternity. Sins are forgiven. Pastor Tim, I've got a lot of baggage. I'm not perfect. Perfect people don't go to heaven. Forgiven people do. Born again people do. And I want to invite you, if you're here today, if you want to be born again and start an introduction, being a friendship, being a friend of God, this is what it says. This is the intro. This is the introduction. And if you're here today, and I'm telling you, this is a good bucket. Just by you sitting here today listening, this is a good bucket. Life changes. Listen to the man that did it all. Listen to the really rich guy who wrote the journal and said, I had the money, I had the resources, the time and the energy, and I got everything. Well, if I can just have a baby, I'll be significant. If I can just get a boyfriend, if I can just get a husband, if I can just get this. And Solomon goes, I had 700. It doesn't fill the bucket. Life doesn't work without God. And if you're here today, I'm not asking you to join a church or join a religion. I'm not asking you to to simply sign up for some. I'm asking you to start a friendship and a relationship with God. It's called being born again. Jesus said this in John 3:3, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they're born again. Doesn't say you have to be Baptist, Catholic, doesn't even say you have to go to OSC to this church. It says you have to be born again. And that's the introduction. I want to invite you to that. With every head bowed and every eye closed, I'm going to ask you one simple thing. If you're here today and say, Pastor Tim, I want to start that journey. I've got some messed up things. I don't have it all together. None of us do. You can even say I'm really rich. It doesn't matter. If you're here today, rich or poor, young or old, you've done it all, you haven't done anything. I think I've learned something from Josh, the Jaguar driver, Solomon, the diary writer, and Job, the man who had a lot of pain in his life. I want to invite you to start a journey with God today. I'm going to pray a born again prayer. And if you're here today, I'm going to make it as easy as I can. I'm not going to ask you to stand. I'm not going to ask you to walk forward. But if you're here today and say, Pastor Tim, I want to start this journey. Man, I want to listen to the guy who wrote the diary. I want prime days. I want my best days ahead and best days in eternity. And if that's you, and you go, Pastor Tim, when you pray that born again prayer, man, I want to be in that. I want to be part of that prayer. I want to start there. And I'm telling you folks, with every head bowed and every eye closed, this is a good bucket. It's worth it. This is a good bucket. Jesus said, anyone who believes in me will never be disappointed. That's what he said. And if you say, Pastor Tim, would you just put me in that prayer when you pray that born again prayer? I want to be part of that. Won't make you stand, won't make you come forward, but I will ask you this without any hesitation. If that's you, and go, put me in that prayer, Pastor Tim. I'm going to start that journey. Would you just raise your hand right now? Hold it up high. Come on, hold it up high, as high as you can. I want to make sure I see every hand, and I'm going to go around, I'm going to count and make sure I see every hand that's up. Keep them up. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Keep them up. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. That's fantastic. 29. Got you back there. You could put your hands down. God bless you. Come on. Let's put our hands together. Can we pray this together with those 29 people? Come on. Say this with me out loud. Dear Lord Jesus, I believe you're the Son of God. I believe that on the cross, you took my sin, my shame, and my guilt, and you died for it. You faced hell for me so I wouldn't have to go. You rose from the dead to give me a place in heaven, purpose on earth, and a relationship with your Father. Today, Lord Jesus, I turn from my sin to be born again. God is my Father. Jesus is my Savior. The Holy Spirit is my helper. And heaven is my home. In Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. Come on, can you put your hands together? Stand with me.